Strong Dads wants to thank Quality Auto Mart for joining us as a sponsor. Quality Auto Mart was born in 1985. They are owned and operated by Mark and Nancy Repke. Quality Auto Mart provides all the services, repairs, and maintenance for your vehicle's needs with a 3-year auto parts and labor warranty. They offer complimentary vehicle safety inspection and estimates. Also, they offer a shuttle service, and the 4th oil change is always on them. They are located at 7307 on State Road 46 in Batesville, Indiana. Make sure you give them a call at 812-934-2301.
All right. Hey, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another show here, hanging out with Merle. We had some deep conversation last week, Merle. Some deep,
that's deeper than we're used to going, man.
Yeah,
that
intellectual
scared me.
thoughts. We came across as experts. I know you
guys.
No,
we did not.
Yeah, last week
How dare you ever call us an expert or smart?
I know. I was always told you'll never become an expert in the Bible until you meet the author.
So
that's
good. I like that. That's
like
good.
That? I didn't even come up with that. So yeah. So last week we were again this little series we're doing right now. We're kind of in the how. The how do we really tackle the Bible, because it is fairly overwhelming, especially if this is new to you. So this little series we're doing is talking about the whys, which is our first week of this, and then last week again was the how. We went over the Old Testament, and for some of you guys, it may be very overwhelming to read the Old Testament. So hopefully we gave you a few odds and nuggets to kind of take away and kind of look at the Old Testament and see the significance of it. As we begin to tackle this Bible and what the significance it plays in our life. And this week we're going to jump into the New Testament and kind of talk about that. Last week we finished talking about how God gave us His best, and how throughout the Old Testament God asked His people to make sacrifices, to give atonements for their sins, and how God did that for us with Jesus. So
yeah, I had a guy ask me the other day, so the Old Testament, like, it just bores me and everything. So what should I read in it? And you're going to get plenty of people say, well, you should read the whole Bible, front to back and back to front and all these things, and you should know it. And yes, in time, if you're reading something that you don't have any understanding of what to even look for, I'm a directed reader, meaning I seldom just read for simply the pleasure of reading. Like, I have to know, like, here's the information I'm looking for, and then I will dive in and I'll read like crazy on that information.
Sure.
So I have to have some direction. And so maybe one thing to say, if you're kind of new and you're trying to understand, listening to our show last week, you got to understand kind of the reason for that Old Testament and how it's broken up. And start with Genesis, just with the idea of knowing God's just revealing His nature. Okay, like, this is how He works. And God is God and you're not, all right? And then once God gives us the opportunity to reject Him, and He does that because that's where love starts to come out. That's love can only happen with the ability to reject, okay, which sounds really weird, but love has to be a choice. And then once you start to understand that, the rest of Genesis and then all through Exodus and then really the rest of the Old Testament is about the idea of man pursuing man's nature, God pursuing us going back to God's nature, and it's going back and forth. And so there's just constant story after story of man doing his thing and going back and forth. And Old Testament characters are no different than us. That's why you'll see guys like David, who was such a great leader, but then all of a sudden he not a very good boy at times, right? Like, and he's doing some not so good things, and he's struggling with pursuing his nature, but then falling to his knees and going back to God's nature because he wants to be aligned with God because he knows that that's what he's called to do. And so don't get overwhelmed by all of those pages in the Old Testament. Just start to understand, okay, this is a story of God revealing His nature and how He wants us to see it, and then how man and God have constantly tried to do this dance, because We want to dance on our own dance floor. And God's like, nope, this is the floor I would like you on. Okay, but I'll give you the choice. So just to kind of help you, like, don't get bogged down by all those books at first until you know, oh, now I know kind of the theme. Now I'll watch this character as he pursues himself and then goes back and pursues God.
I know I've told you guys this before. Maybe my all-time favorite book, for sure, my favorite my favorite book in the Old Testament, maybe my favorite book of all time is Job. So if you're in a storm,
I don't like Job.
If you're in a storm right now in your life and you're just feeling down in the dumps, go read Job. You'll feel a little bit better about yourself.
Yeah, and then, man, there's a guy who was after God's heart, but just continued to be Satan. I don't like it because I can imagine God and Satan at the poker table going, okay, well, which one you got here? I'll give you this guy, Job. It did the whole thing, but it just shows that how the culture would pull Job one way and it looks attractive and like the right thing to do, and then get pulled back into, no, I need to chase God. So good point.
It'll be a good show today. Again, we're going to kind of talk a lot about the New Testament. So before we do, we'd like to thank Quality Auto Mart for coming alongside of us. Really do appreciate them for all they're doing for us. Continue to allow us to put shows out them. Check them out. Let them know we sent you up there. So thanks so much for Quality Auto Mart.
All right. Also want to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions. So as we are recording this, we're starting to get some buds on the trees, and so lots of outdoor projects, landscaping, that kind of thing is coming back to life. So for all your outdoor projects, check out Casey's Outdoor Solutions, located outside of Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
I like it. Yep. So all right. So today we're going to get into the New Testament. So give us a little bit of background as far as on the New Testament, as far as kind of maybe the overarching when it comes to the New Testament, what we're looking at.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about some words here. We sometimes talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament, or the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Yeah. And so the Old Covenant, a covenant is a promise. Okay, it is a promise. And it is a promise not between, so a contract is a promise between man to man. Okay. And so we could have a marriage contract, and that's a legal contract that binds a couple together in the state's eyes, okay, the government's eyes and man's eyes. But a covenant is when we elevate it between you and God, okay? And so the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, is a promise that God makes to us about how his nature will be, and then how we can pursue that. And so oftentimes associated with the Old Covenant is the law. And the law is God. Like when I work with people all the time, I talk about my speed limits, and I've mentioned this on other shows before. God wants us to be on a directed path. He doesn't like when we wreck and crash, okay? And so he goes out and he goes, listen, these people are driving recklessly. They're going to get killed. So he goes out and he posts speed limit signs, no different than our police would do, right? Our government would go out and they would say, hey, on this road, this is the speed limit. Let's do 50 miles an hour on here. And he posts those laws so that if we abide by them, we're going to be safe. All right, we're going to be in his nature. But if we go, you know what, I don't really care about that. I'm in a hurry today. I got to do my own thing today. I'm going to drive how I want. We're probably going to get ourselves in trouble, okay? And so the Old Covenant starts to reveal all these laws where God is trying to get our attention to see, hey, do it this way, and you'll see it goes a lot better, okay? But as we talked about last week, everybody finds a loophole. Human nature says, yeah, well, it said 50 miles an hour here, but I didn't see a sign in this area, so maybe that's 80. And so the next thing you know, I can't put a speed limit at the beginning of the road. I have to put speed limits all the way up and down the road, every like 200 feet apart, because I'm going to find my way.
My loophole for driving? I shouldn't tell you this. But 9 over, you're fine. 10, you're mine. So if I drive 9 miles an hour over the speed limit, I'm good. But if I go 10, the cop, they'll get me.
Yeah, I always heard it was 6 miles an hour.
6?
Yeah.
I'm screwed, Merle.
I live by a state cop, and they used to say 6 was their grace.
Okay.
Yeah, like
6
on the interstate.
6 you're fine, 7 you're mine.
Yeah. So if it's 70 miles an hour, they're going to give you about 76.
You're
After
out in God's country in Indiana. You get 70-mile-an-hour speed limits. We're still stuck in 65 in Ohio.
Well, you see right there where we're trying to cheat it, right?
Yep.
And this is human nature.
Yep.
Like, I don't like to be constricted and restricted.
Yep.
And so that's the Old Testament, and it's just piling this up and piling this up. And so we come out the end of the Old Testament with 613 laws and rules and signs and all these different things. And none of them are bad in and of themselves. They're trying to deal with people in the culture that they're in. And that's why some of them today don't make sense to us, but they're in the culture that they're in. It's like, maybe someday we don't drive cars anymore. Well, a speed limit sign on a road wouldn't make sense if 200 years from now we didn't drive cars.
Sure.
But we still get the idea of why it was trying to direct us towards a safe way.
Yep.
Okay. And so finally, it's exhausting and people are frustrated, right? And people cannot follow God's way well. All right. And that's when, as it's through Isaiah numerous times, there's going to be a way. There's going to be a teacher. There's going to be a great Messiah who's going to show you exactly what God really wants out of you. Rather than all these laws, he's going to show you exactly how he wants you to live.
Right.
And that's where we come into the New Testament.
Yep. Yeah, and as we jump into the New Testament, the start of the New Testament has our Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and again, this is something that I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, I learned, and maybe this shows my ignorance and my stupidity here. I learned that those are all the exact same story, just written by our Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and how cool it is.
Now, before you judge him for that, we all have our own walk, okay?
But it's cool to see their perception and their kind of how they perceive this Jesus guy, because again, the New Testament is all things Jesus. It's the whole life of Jesus. It's talking about Jesus' ministry and what he did. And I just love reading through the Gospels because again, how I view Jesus is going to be different than how you view Jesus.
Right.
And we would write different things about them. It is the same story, just written by different people. And I think it is so cool to start the New Testament with different perspectives, having different people write down what they saw with the Jesus. Again, exact same story, same life of Jesus, just written with different perspectives in mind.
Yeah. And so God now comes to earth in human form. And so why would he do that? Okay. I'm a counselor in my regular job. You and I had a conversation before we hit the record button. It is extremely important to me in a counseling session to be relatable to people. And sometimes I mess up. Sometimes I assume of what it takes to relate to somebody based off of how they come in, how I might see them look, first impressions. And so I try to not be them, but I try to talk in their world, okay? Because I want them to know that I try to get them. I try to understand them. So I'll just say, like, maybe I talk more like they do, okay, in terms of if I got a rough, gruff old construction dude in there versus a priest, I'm going to come across a little bit different so that I can assimilate more into the world so that they start to buy into me. Like, okay, this guy gets me. I can relate to him. And so right off the bat, Christ comes in. Even though he's God and he is of God's nature 100%, he's a man who is actually trying to assimilate and working to assimilate, not to do exactly what man does, but to be as man is in his living so that people go, yeah, that dude's all right. Like he gets us.
Right.
He gets us. Okay. And once that happens, so as a teacher, if you want to be a good teacher, you got to relate to your kids, and your kids have to be able to relate to you. There's nothing worse than an arrogant teacher who's all book smart, who comes in and speaks over the heads of all of the students. Every student shuts them down, even though the teacher may be brilliant. Okay. And even Christ still had some of that problem, but it wasn't because he was brilliant. It was because he was telling people what they didn't want to hear. And that's why they would be rejecting him. Okay. So Jesus comes in and he is working hard to do that perfect match of human and God. And I can't imagine sometimes the struggle that must have been like, oh, wow, these people are wearing me out.
Yep. And it's so cool to see not only did God give us the human form of Jesus, that's when the Holy Spirit was introduced to the New Testament, and how cool that is that by getting baptized, you now have the Holy Spirit with you, and just seeing again kind of the 3 in 1, the Trinity that is spoken about, just how awesome it is to see the life of Jesus and the ministry that came along with that. And then to know that now, because of Jesus, we have the Holy Spirit, and how awesome that is to, again, just truly trying to understand the kind of the makeup and the works of God, and how he kind of like, put this into the text of the New Testament, and to read the ministry of Jesus, and you get to see again the human form, the man that was Jesus. Again, it is fully God, but also fully man, and the relatability that comes along with that. It is hard to not, find yourself in a similar situation that Jesus was in and be like, man, I screwed up and Jesus didn't, right? And to see that again, God gave us his best, which we talked about in last week's show.
Yeah. So then the idea of once he's given his best to us, then the idea of us starting to work to see what that means, and how Jesus did not come to do away with the law, right? And we hear that in Scripture. He didn't come to say, no, the law was silly and ridiculous, because the law continues to reflect, no, chase this way, go this direction, do these things, okay? But because we kept falling out of it, Jesus comes to talk about the most important reason why God created mankind, and that is to talk about love. To talk about love. And so when Jesus was asked about what are the greatest commandments, he says, the first one that you need to do is love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul. And so the idea that, okay, like that is number one. And then he does something that I don't want him to say. He says, and then love your neighbor as yourself. No, because that means I have to choose my neighbor equally as myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so right now we're getting a new revelation of how God's nature will work here with us, is if it's going to work well, how it works well with mankind if we're going to follow God's way. And so the New Testament is a constant revelation of Jesus giving parables about how a man chose to do this, but then it was revealed that he should do this. Everything from the Good Samaritan to the woman at the well, forgiveness and love, all of these things about how we choose to love another person and we love God. And these are the things, these are the general principles, okay? The law is kind of the day-to-day, daily little thing, but it's the general principles that if we govern ourselves by with love and forgiveness and grace, that Jesus keeps on reflecting back to us, that he wants us to see.
Yep, I like it. At the beginning of the show, you were talking, just some takeaways or some things that we can, as we're trying to tackle the Old Testament, some books to look at. What do you think are some good starting points, some good books to kind of dive into in the New Testament? Again, we're trying to just figure out how do I tackle this massive book? What are some of your recommendations? What do you think would be a good place to start when it comes to the New Testament?
Well, like you said, there's 4 Gospels, okay? And people go like, why 4? Okay, like you said, it's different perspectives based off of different experiences that they saw, okay? And so a good place to start, that if you just want to go through and just say, well, I don't want to read them all, I don't have time to read them all, choose one of the Gospels, okay? I would recommend Mark or John, okay? Just because you'll get their insight, okay? And just to see how the two of them come at things a little bit differently. I really like John because John said something that I don't think I understood. And it starts off at the very beginning, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God. And then it talks about how the Word became flesh. And here the Word is Christ. Yeah. And I never when I was younger and I didn't what? And that's why, when you hear somebody say, oh my word, oh my word, they're really saying, oh my Jesus, or oh my God. All right. So it's this slang sort of, oh my word.
Yeah.
All right. And you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah, this is Jesus is one that we are to proclaim and understand from the get-go, okay? And so that John is really good to start with, and Mark, okay? But then after that, then you got all these other books, okay? And I mean, I just love Paul.
There's a lot of words are written by Paul in the Bible.
Yeah, he writes all these letters,
Yeah.
right? He writes these epistles, these letters, and he writes them to different communities. Because Paul is cool, because Paul was not in the club at first, right? He wasn't one of the original 12. In fact, he was beating up the 12,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
He was a Jew of Jews, and anything that went against the Jewish way, Paul was like, no, and he rejected him, and he was nasty. And then he had his revelation into God's nature. And it was his revelation through God's nature, like, Paul, why do you beat me up like this? You know, well, Paul was doing that because he was all of the law.
Right.
He was Mr. Self-Righteous of the law, which was what we often fall into when we think we get it right. And God reveals to him, dude, it's way more than just about the law. It's about these bigger principles of love and grace and truth and so on. And so now Paul goes out and he starts working and teaching, and he's writing letters to the various towns and communities, okay? And so choosing a couple of his letters that he writes is just a really cool thing, because he's writing to them in terms of what they're struggling with, right? I mean, if he's writing to the people of Ephesus, the Ephesians, he's like, okay, well, in this community, here's where I see you guys struggling. Here's what you're doing good, not so good.
Yep.
Here's how I can help you see what God's nature through Christ would be like.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's so cool as you start to read through some of the letters of Paul, just like you were saying, because of who he was, he references so much of the Old Testament, and it really starts to kind of, again, intertwine those two. So again, as a question I'm going to pose to you, what the heck is up with this last book of the Bible, this book of Revelations? Because again, it is a part of it's a part of the Bible. It's a part of the New Testament. Like, it should be something that we do try and tackle. Like, what do you think is a recommendation for some guys out there that are maybe just starting to learn about the New Testament, just starting to kind of dive into it, and then all of a sudden we get to the end of the Bible and we have this Revelation, which is a really, really hard book to read.
The whole book is about revelation. I mean, the whole Bible is revealing things, right? The Old Testament is, and Genesis is revealing God's initial nature. But in the final book of Revelation, we're getting a lot of crazy, figuratively, almost mystical sort of things, and written by John as he's getting visions of what it will be in the end, like how this big story ends, okay? And because it is very, very visionary, like, it's extremely creative. I mean, there's like all kinds of weird, multiple types of animal type things out there, and different visions. And so Revelation can be crazy weird. But when you read Revelation, you really want to, this is where I started to learn about spiritual warfare. That on a whole different plane, we are constantly, Satan loves you when you are you, meaning pursuing you. Okay? Because that's not pursuing God. Satan rejected God. Okay? And so he loves when you reject God and you're like him. And so this now happens at a spiritual level, and it talks then about the great war that is going to happen, not just in our physical world that we're going to see, but in a spiritual world where angels fight angels of the good and the bad, and where ultimately the way of God, God's nature, will prevail. And it's kind of like it's a reassurance letter of like, you know, at the end of the day, when people choose God, God is going to win. Okay. So Revelation, I would caution to read Revelation. I'd read it through very casually first, and then maybe get into a Bible study with Revelation, where you can get somebody who's pretty smart and knowledgeable in the area just to help. Because that's what I've done with our preacher did a really good job of having a series on Revelation, and he broke apart all these little parts and said, okay, see what this is this, and this is that, and it helps you to connect the dots.
Yep. So that brings up a really good point, Merle. And this is something, again, we're talking all things on how to tackle the Bible. How do we go about approaching this? This is something we were talking about before the show. I have made mention, we've actually had a lot of these guys on our show way back in the day, a couple of years ago. We had guys from my small group on our podcast. This is something, if we are supposed to be like Jesus, we are supposed to be surrounded by other dudes doing life together. Jesus had his 12 disciples. And if we want to be, if we read this book and we believe it to be a transforming thing that can change your life, we should do the same. This has been something I have had a small group for the last 8+ years of my life. Every Tuesday night we meet for 2 hours. This is a group of guys that I do life with. We spend an hour talking about things that are going on in our life. We spend an hour reading different books. Man, I would so strongly encourage you to find a group of guys to tackle this book, because there's so many nuances to it. There's so many different ways to read it, to view it. Just like there's different perspectives in the Gospels, the way that they view Jesus. Man, how awesome it is to be surrounded by other guys who are trying to figure this out together. So if you're trying to figure out how to tackle this book, I would encourage you first and foremost to find a group of guys to do it with. Because then their guys come from different expertise. They have different mindsets. They can view things in different different ways. I would really encourage you to do that. Something that my small group has done, and we continue to do, and I know I've made mention to this again, talking how do we tackle this book. Every June to August, we read the entire Bible in 90 days, and it is a daunting task. It comes out to be about an hour a day, and I say this because I think it's important, the two different ways that we in our group, and again, it is not the way, it's just a way that we like to tackle it. So we read the entire Bible in 90 days. And what it has done for the last 3 years, this will be our 4th year doing it, is it gives this overarching idea of what the Bible is presenting to us. And it gives the story of who Jesus is. It gives the Levitical laws in the Old Testament and how those still play a part in today's world. So you're not going to get the nuances that is, some of the finer details of the Bible, because you have so much to read. Like, you're reading the entire book of Job in one day. Like, you're not going to get some of the integral details of the Bible by doing it this way, which leads me to my next thing. Every Tuesday we tackle a chapter, a single chapter. We're just going to read right now in our small group, and I know I've mentioned this, we're in Micah, and we're digging one chapter of Micah every single Tuesday. And what we do, similar to what you're talking about, with finding experts, in reference to Revelation, is we use two different experts per se. We use what's called the Enduring Word, which is an app. So, and the app gives a lot of references to why Paul is writing what he's writing, why Micah is writing what he's writing. He's referencing different parts of the Levitical law, and then in the New Testament you can read, and they're referencing an Old Testament scripture and kind of that foreshadowing. So we use the Enduring Word, and the other one we use is called the Bible Project, which the app that we use to read is the U version, which is the most popular, most downloaded Bible app in the entire world. So those are some of the resources that we use, and we have a great deal of success in the sense of every week we're getting into it. Every week, it is really difficult to find a group of guys that can sit around and read the Bible and actually use it as an application to our day-to-day life. And man, I can't tell you the amount of growth that I've had from meeting every Tuesday, from reading the Bible cover to cover. We've done it in chronological order, and then we've read it from cover to cover, and they're not the same. You may not know that. I didn't know that early on. So I would just encourage you guys to find accountability, find a group of guys that you can tackle this book together, because what it can do for you is crazy. The amount of growth that I have had from doing this with this group is incredible. Yeah, man, it's a huge point, because I think that's part of where we talked about the Tower of Babel before, right? And so when people start to get high on themselves and knowledgeable, they start to think their way is the right way, and the next thing you know, they start to build their own
religion like I did in last week's show,
Yeah.
right? And then my religion doesn't quite go with your religion. So I finally say, you know what? I don't like your religion, and I go my own way.
Yeah.
And so we separate, okay? And to the credit of the Catholic Church, they knew how powerful it was to get people on the same page. But the problem early on is that literacy with a very complicated subject was minimal, okay? And so we had priests who were those they were the mediator of the word, okay? And it was extremely necessary that you had somebody who was educated and trained who would say, this is what this means. And to this day, that's what you're talking about. Like I have to bring in somebody who goes, I don't quite get this. What does this mean? And I think one thing that I've had a hard time accepting, when I don't understand what the Bible means, it doesn't mean the Bible's wrong. It means I just don't understand what it means.
Right.
And the old me wanted to say, well, I don't know if I agree with that. And so that's that humbling, that atonement of no, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not God's nature. And so then, we needed those priests to help us with that. And then all of a sudden they invented something called the Gutenberg Press. And the Gutenberg Press started to allow mass production of the Bible. And that's right around the time when all of a sudden Martin Luther makes his great rebellion, against the Catholic Church. And, there are people who will protest that today, like that was one of the worst things that ever happened. Listen, God does what God does. Yeah. And if there was another way to spread the greater message, the Old Testament was all about the law, and then all of a sudden we bring in the New Testament, and Christ is teaching about the way, not the law, but the way, all right? And so, and I think that the Protestants and the Catholics and all of them, like God's using all this. He's using it all for his good. And now we have these inventions, and it's whether we use them well or not. Social media is the next Tower of Babel that we've recently talked about. And now it's up to us whether we use it well or not. But because of these things, these apps, you talked about the YouVersion app, there are so many resources to help you understand his way. All right. So what a great point you bring up. Get in a study. There's plenty of resources. I started with just a life application Bible. So when I was in my early 30s for my birthday, Linda got me, it was the very first Bible I ever owned. It was a life application Bible, and it was way too thick. I was like, holy cow. Right. But the cool thing about that is it had great little commentators,
little study Bible
notes, that would help me go, oh, that's why they did this, that I never understood before. And it frustrated me that why didn't a priest was not going to be able to cover every question I ever had, in real time. So anyway, there's so many awesome tools out there right now, but we humbling ourselves to say, no matter what, whether I get it or not, I want to follow God's word. If it's in conflict with something that I'm doing, I'm the one that's struggling, not God. God's way is his way. It's not to be mocked. So anyway, you got anything else, man?
I do. Again, we're talking all things how do I tackle this book? Man, I would just encourage you to just open it up. Just don't let this book intimidate you. Is it intimidating? It absolutely can be. But man, I truly do believe in the power of God and who he is. And if you're struggling, just open it up. It doesn't matter what page it is. Yes, we give kind of recommendations on ways to make it a little bit easier to kind of comprehend. There are some difficult books that are in the Bible for sure. Are they intimidating? They can be 100%. But man, I would encourage you, just open it up. Yep. Just see what it's going to teach you. Another little saying I heard, that God is not afraid of a dusty Bible. Or sorry, the devil is not. The devil is not afraid of a dusty Bible.
No, absolutely.
And man, I just think there's so much good. Again, the apps. Golly, I'm a terrible reader. I will be the first to admit you. The YouVersion app reads it to you. It reads the daggone Bible to you. Like, how cool is that? That we live. We have the technology to have something that reads the Bible to me.
Which, puts us in that place of saying, at some point in time, every ear will hear. Every eye will see. In other words, you will have no excuse. Yeah. And I think that that's very telling of, those of you who are out there who reject and reject and reject, at some point in time, it will be all around you.
Yeah.
And you won't have that excuse, and you're going to have to put up to either your way or his way.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys, we hope that helps of talking about the why we even pursue, and then the how, like Old Testament, New Testament. And by no means was this to be a final conversation. This is one of growth for Kyle and I, and for you guys. Our challenge for you, as Kyle says, open the book. Get into a group of some sort, all right? Find somebody who's knowledgeable than you are, okay, that is trustworthy, that wants to pull out that book and say, well, here's what it means, okay? And go for his way. Go for the way of God through his son Christ. He was the model, all right?
I like it.
Wrap us up, dude.
Good deal. Thanks so much for Quality Auto Mart and Casey Outdoor Solutions for coming alongside us. Really do appreciate them. Share the heck out of these shows. Listen, give us a 5-star rating. It really helps kind of spread the word out there. Email, if you guys have questions on the YouTube page, put comments up there, man. We would love to kind of tackle this idea with you, tackle this Bible together, man. It's something that we need to do as men, as strong dads. So just really encourage you guys to do that, and hope you guys are having a good week, and go out there and raise some strong dads.
You got it. Say yep. Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Casey's offers a wide selection of plants, landscaping materials, home and garden decor, and gifts for every occasion. Casey's is committed to providing exceptional service, a unique shopping experience, and value to every customer. Stop in and see what makes Casey's so unique. Located at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana, or call 812-537-3800. Let Casey's help you add beauty to your home.